Okay, now we're getting into the levels of what's really going on inside the cultural differences, but that doesn't come from, it's inside the people, but it comes from the development of hundreds and maybe thousands of years of psychological understanding of where that country sits in the world. You have countries that, they were empires once, and they can never get over that concept of being an empire. It's always kind of that's like almost a stopping point in history for maybe Rome, for example. They're not really gonna be an empire anymore. British, they still think they're an empire in their minds. They might be, I don't know, banking empire. The US almost pretends they're not, we're like the not empire. We're not an empire, we're a democracy. So they're like fake, humble brag empire. Mongolia, they still believe in the pride of Genghis Khan. They're always going to believe that. The Colosseum in Rome, the Greek architecture, the great civilizations of Egypt. I mean, everybody's got it, some kind of internal feeling about what made them great. So, but there's other cultures that maybe they figure out that the best way to be is to be cautious around their neighbors or about the future, or conservative, and that's the most successful way for them to survive for thousands of years. And all of this goes deep down into the people that you're dealing with in that country. So this is Hofstede. Hofstede is a Dutch guy, and he made some, if you're playing a video game, you have, stamina and strength and agility and maybe intelligence. You have different factors that define the strengths and weaknesses and differences between characters. Well, that's what Hofstede did with all these countries. He took all these countries in the world and said, okay, we're going to measure these differences between countries and try to get a feeling for, or at least create an understanding that if you want to understand or go to that country, you can quickly get some sense of the psychology of the people compared to your own society. Not better, not worse, but like that video 2 classes ago said, he was talking about the Dutch guy, if you remember. He was comparing these things. He's not the Dutch guy, this is a different Dutch guy. But he was saying if there's a difference in some level, strength or whatever, of 10 points, that's when you start to feel it, right? So if it's like 5 points difference, it feels like your own country. It doesn't really feel very different. But if it goes 10, 20 points difference, that's something that you probably have to figure out how to overcome in your relationships. And even if you're married to somebody from that country. So let's listen to Jim do an overview, and then I'll show you the website and we can look at it in detail a little bit more.
Hi there. When we're looking at organisational culture, particularly in the context of multinational businesses, it's important to consider the different cultures that exist around the world. And the theorist who came up with a model of this was Gert Hofstede and his theory of national culture. So let's take a quick look at what his theory, his model said. There he is, there's Gert Hofstede, a social psychologist, and he conducted his initial piece of research at IBM, one of the world's first genuinely global operating multinational businesses. He looked at the activities, the work ethics and attitudes of over 100,000 employees working for IBM around the world, and tried to categorise his findings in terms of different cultures of the different nations where IBM was operating. And he has since expanded this research to come up with 6 categories that help define national cultures. So let's have a look at the 6. They're listed there. I'm going to take you through each for 30 seconds or so. The key thing if you're studying this model is just to be aware of what the 6 are and how they differ, and potentially to make a link between some of them and other aspects of the course. Let's start with individualism versus collectivism. Here the issue is that some societies absolutely value the role and performance of individuals over the team, whereas in other societies, other cultures, teamwork, the importance of team is more important than the individual. And of course this has significant implications for how employees are rewarded. Do you give them financial bonuses, for example commissions, based on how they perform as individuals, or do you set financial rewards up to improve motivation based around team performance? You can see how a different cultural attitude to team versus individual influences areas like motivational strategy. The second category, and perhaps the most famous category from Hofstede's research, was what he called the power distance. This is all about the extent to which a culture recognises, encourages either authority and what goes with that, bureaucracy, tall organisational hierarchies, a command and control approach perhaps, compared with a low PD score where the culture would very much encourage flatter organisational structures and much greater emphasis on delegation and empowerment and autonomy. Perhaps also you might make a link there to decentralised structures, which are also consistent with cultures with a low power distance. The third of Hofstede's categories is what he called masculinity versus femininity, a slightly unfortunately named category. It's really not about male against females, it's more about the differences in decision-making style between different cultures. Hofstede described what he called a masculine approach to decision-making, fact-based, hard-edged, aggressive, comparing that with what he described as what he called a feminine decision-making style, which involves a good deal more consultation, perhaps a greater emphasis on hunch rather than science and data, and a much less aggressive approach to making decisions. So masculinity versus femininity is really all about the style of decision-making in an organisation in different national cultures. The fourth one, Hofstede called uncertainty avoidance. And here this is really all about attitude to risk. How anxious do managers feel at work, do employees feel at work when they're put in the situation of making decisions? What is their attitude of risk, and to what extent do they try to avoid risk and the consequences of getting things wrong? So low levels of uncertainty avoidance on Hofstede's index would indicate a willingness to accept more risks. Not too concerned about avoiding uncertainty, bring it on. Let's embrace risk, let's embrace change. Perhaps that's suggestive of a more entrepreneurial approach in those countries, compared with high levels of uncertainty avoidance, which would suggest potentially a less entrepreneurial approach. Perhaps structures that emphasise the need for more certainty, less risk-taking. Long-term orientation was Hofstede's fifth category, and this is all about how far you look ahead. What's your perspective, your time horizon when making business decisions?
This is good, and the notes are really good, and I'll put it in the classroom for you. But also, you could just look it up as Tutor for You Hofstede, Tutor to You, Tutor to number 2 U, letter U. But I think some of them are easier to understand than others, so I think it's better that I maybe interrupt it now. Let me just see, I'll just make my explanation again, and then we'll go into detail when we actually look at the countries. So, individual versus collective, I would say that my culture is quite individualistic. The performance, my commitment to an organization is only as much as I feel like that organization is committed to me. And how much trust there is in that relationship. Obviously, you have Americans running around saying, masks are fake, we don't need masks. I don't know what's fake and what's not anymore, but there's the behavior of the people is, I'm gonna do what I wanna do. In Vietnam, it's a collectivist culture, much more. So it's much easier to get everybody motivated, or let's say, to implement the mask law and social distancing really quickly. So yeah, it's much easier to mobilize, that's the word. Much easier to mobilize a group of people who think in a collective way. Which is not to say that everybody thinks the same, but it's just that the values are believed to be shared. The trust level between people is high enough that we all can work together to solve a problem. Whereas in the US, it's immediately a reaction to somebody else telling you that you should or should not do something. And it also, I guess the example here, well, I'll go into it in more detail. That's the first thing. Power distance is, when I was growing up, they told me, you can be president someday. Everyone can become president. Bill Clinton, if you work hard and play by the rules, you will be successful. So there's this idea that you can be a billionaire or president, or everybody has a chance. That we're not that far from the power centers, right? That's what we are supposed to believe. But whether that's true or not, that's the mythology. So we have this idea that we can, when there's powerful people, that we have the right to talk to them, that we have that we're on the same level. Now, I will go to a country like Thailand, for example. Thailand was funny. It was a funny place. Let me show you the diagram here. Hofstad's model. It's all pretty much online and free, so that Bing doesn't work today, which is another weird thing. Every other website works, but not Bing. Is it a hack? What happened? So the nice thing, this Hofstad, he's got a lot of stuff in there, but for the most part, he gives away a lot of his insights for free, actually. So our model here is the National Culture 6D model. I'll go over this in detail, but where's the one where you can put two countries in? country tool. There it is, country comparison. So when you think about Thailand, and of course Saudi Arabia, for example, so we have these, well, I guess Thailand is pretty high, but it's not that extreme. It's high enough for me to feel the difference, but is it that extreme? Maybe not. So when you're in Thailand, for example, you really feel like estimated. Yes, they are estimated, since they make up the thing themselves. So here it says power distance, Thailand 64 and the US 40. When I was in Thailand, I feel like you're, you know, there's a king, right? There's still quite a powerful king. That king is like, you know, he's, you know, usually I guess they might have queens too, but whoever that monarchy is high in the sky, and their power is given to them by Buddha, in this case. Many other monarchies, the power comes from God. So you're never going to be king. Your power distance is huge. You don't, as an individual, your, you know, power is up in the sky. You might even connect to God, and you're not going to get there. Your power, you don't really influence. Now, it can also go to local government level, and some people can have, you know, there can be very democratic or even socialistic communes that are at local levels, where individuals have some influence and can participate in power and decision making at lower levels. But the higher levels are still pretty far up in the sky. So that's what power distance is. Like, how much do individuals influence the decision making of the culture, or even how much they can have an influence. So here it says a high power distance score would indicate a national culture that accepts, you know, bureaucracy like an army rank. You are more important than this person is more important than this person. Also, yeah, those cultures that like Singapore or India, they have very strong power distance, because you can't not even dreaming of power. You're in a class. You're put into a class. You're understood to be in this class, and there's no movement from that. A lower power distance score would suggest it's a flatter system with more voices, or at least voices can stand out without having to respect the power above them as much. Talk about that more when we compare countries. The range. Masculine versus feminine doesn't mean male and female. It basically is like logic versus feelings, which might be considered sexist. But we'll talk about that later. I just wanted to catch you up on a few of those. This is one that I was talking about in terms of conservative or more open-minded, right? So uncertainty avoidance considers the different attitudes to risk-taking. This does not only means social risk. It means financial risk, saving money, investing money, things like that. The level of stress that people have when they face uncertainty, when they face possibilities that they don't understand the outcome. Now, in my grandparents' generation, they put their money in the bank, they put their money into very slow growing investments, maybe 5% every year. And they did that for 30 years so they could have enough money when they were old. Now, the business climate rewards risk more than conservative behavior in a lot of cases. Buy a Bitcoin, buy a Dogecoin, buy a few random things, and they may skyrocket in value. People who are very comfortable with uncertainty are losing a lot of money, but also earning or receiving a lot of return on investment these days. Low levels of uncertainty indicate a willingness to accept more risk. So, yeah, they're not worried about it. High levels of uncertainty mean that we need to follow the rules better. We need to just do the right thing. Follow, everybody just needs to be very conservative, very conservative reaction to uncertainty. These cultures might be less entrepreneurial, less risk-taking. All right, I think this rain is gonna stop, I hope. I'll let Jim go a little bit longer.
Or certainty, less risk-taking. Long-term orientation was Hofstede's fifth category, and this is all about how far you look ahead, what's your perspective, your time horizon.
Wow. So many things are working against me. I have to go and start an online class in about 10 minutes, and I'm dreaming of finishing this video, but the rain, very loud, and pretty much laughing at me. Long-term orientation. China, when they first had a cultural revolution that was 1949, when the Cultural Revolution started. They considered their plan to take 100 years. They thought that they would be free of Western control and imperialism 100 years later, completely. That was their goal. That's a pretty long-term orientation. If you buy stock in IBM or you buy stock in slow-growing, non-tech related companies, you're thinking that you're going to keep your money, maybe even property. You think you're going to keep your money in those investments for a long time. If you're a day trader, your time is much different. Your attitude towards time. If you're a shareholder in a company, it depends on the quarterly results. So when you match up two cultures, there can be conflict. There can be conflict between how long they expect the goals to be. Wow. They just don't. Can you hear that? That's like the storm of the century. Every time I speak, it gets louder. Yeah, come on. Come on. I'm not turning this video off. Come on. Come on. Bring it. Bring your house down. Yeah. Listen to that. Yeah. More. Hurricanes. Lightning. Actually, I'm gonna lose. I'm losing. This is way too loud. It's kind of unbelievable. So the last category, I'm just gonna mention it. So you have a familiarity with all of them. Indulgence versus restraint. So this is like how much a culture is dictated to by fun, by spontaneous choice. And I think this is actually very, it helps for advertising. And I'll just try to explain it. Indulgence stands for a society that allows relatively free, I don't know what gratification means, fulfillment or action towards gratification of basic and natural human drives related to enjoying life and having fun. So, in the moment, how free can someone be, right? So very interesting one. I think it's new. It's relatively new. Some countries have the fun police. Restraint stands for a society that pushes down what people want to do right now and tries to really control a culture. It's not exactly the same as uncertainty avoidance. It's a little bit related, but some countries are very conservative, but then for one festival a year, they'll let people go crazy and the purge, release all of this energy that they've been restraining and controlling them. Some countries are just very, the people, they're a lot of bars, a lot of indulgences, and a lot of gratification, but then everybody goes to church on Sunday, right? One time a week, everybody tries to restrain themselves. After the whole week, they just did whatever they wanted to do. So those are extremes, right? You know, conservative culture, big festival. Thailand's a little bit like that. Very open culture, but then, you know, some strong religious ideas behind the open culture. So that's the sixth one. I think they have 7. They actually have 7 now. That could be number 7.
Difference there. And if
so, unfortunately, the rain is not going to let me go much farther on this, and I have to start another class really soon. So, but we can look at some of these things and kind of imagine them. China, can you be part of the party, the communist? Can you get to the highest levels of society? Most people can't. 80, very high power distance. India, caste system, high, low, untouchables. There's a group of people who are called untouchable. You cannot touch them. They're not going to be president. That's not happening. Very high score. Australia, apparently everybody can participate. UK, fairly high participation. Singapore, very strict hierarchy of power. Individual and collectivism. Australia's even, you know, as we would expect. Australia, UK, and many Western countries are quite individualistic. Here we have the Eastern countries, China, Korea, and Singapore are collectivist in their outlook. Maybe, you know, you should try to maybe guess where Vietnam sits. Those ones are quite, this one maybe is not for sure. But this one, collective, we would mostly agree. Masculine or feminine? How do people decide? Are they deciding based on the calendar and what's a lucky day? Right? Or is it a logical kind of really step-by-step decision? This is about decision making. We need to find some more extreme examples here to get a feeling for that. Uncertainty avoidance. Koreans have a pretty weird history, and that's why all K-pop sounds the same, right? Nobody's gonna take any risks in K-pop because it's going, just keep it going. There's no risk taking there at all. Believe it or not, yeah, it's quite surprising, I think, some of these numbers. Singaporean, very risk-taking in many ways. The US is more conservative than people probably think in terms of risk and worry. And I'll talk about that more later. Long-term orientation, China, as I said earlier, they have a 100-year plan, and that's a very long-term orientation. Korea, even longer somehow. U.S. shareholders, every 3 months we have the results of the profits and losses and the stocks and everything. And Australia even has a shorter orientation than the U.S. Indulgent cultures. Australia, they do seem kind of, they like to, have a good time. India does seem kind of restrained, and there's a lot of weird, there's a lot of, since people are very conservative, those people who do not follow this conservatism feel like black sheep, right? I'm just bad, I'm the bad one, so I just do bad things because culture has told me that I'm bad. It's kind of a weird one, but I want to get into that in detail. I can't do it right now, so I'll do it in the next video. Thank you, Rain. Thanks, everybody. See you later.